we developed our expertise around COVID safety a year and a half ago when we were trying to figure out school reopening strategies, and we were very successful in that effort. We partnered with epidemiologists, with engineers. We reached out to sort of networking professionals to come up with sort of good ideas for how to do this. And I keep thinking that all of this expertise is now irrelevant and doesn't matter anymore, and that keeps not being the case. Now, I know that this has been going on for a long time, and everybody has found ways to adapt. I think what I'd like to talk about here today, where we are in the context, is that nobody wants to repeat the last 2 years, but I think we should prepare for the reality that this is going to be an ongoing issue, and we need to find more sort of durable, sustainable ways to adapt. So everybody has reacted to this in different ways. And that's dependent on what we've been told to do. It's dependent on the makeup of the communities and, frankly, their risk tolerance. And it has to do with the physical characteristics of the buildings themselves. You would think that the buildings is sort of where we would focus our energy and attention, but the fact is all of it matters, that we can't look at any of these measures in isolation, that, sort of a table held up by 3 legs sort of things. This table has 15 legs. But they're not all equal. You take away 1 or 2 of the big ones, the thing's going down. So I think the goal here, what I'm hoping to get across today, is to deliver sort of a more intuitive understanding of what the guidelines are, how they apply to houses of worship, because frankly, they're weird. A lot of the guidelines are simply not applicable. We've had to find some clever workarounds in the analyses that we've done. So that's the goal in 15 minutes. I think I can do it. So we'll start with the easy stuff. Actually, the entity that delivers recommendations for what you should do with your building systems is ASHRAE, the American Society for Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. And it boils down to 2 things. It's increasing filtration and it's increasing ventilation, so that you filter the air as it goes and you get more outside air into it. We're going to come back to each of these in a bit more specificity. There's a good chance a lot of what I'm saying is already familiar to a lot of you, but in case it's not, we talk about filters as the filters that go in your mechanical equipment. They've all got filters. MERV 13 is the recommended. MERV 14 is great. HEPA is ideal. I think that's MERV 23. That basically relates to the size of the particle that the filter can catch. The bigger the number, the smaller the particle. And when we talk about ventilation, one of the metrics that they use is called air changes per hour, ACH. And the COVID recommendation by ASHRAE is 4 to 6 air changes per hour. So that means any bit of air in your room is sort of cycled through the system every 10 to 12 minutes. So those guidelines make great sense if you are in a space that's sort of scaled for classrooms, conference rooms, whatever. If you've got contemporary mechanical systems that comply with current code for outdoor air supply. But what if you don't? What if your space is a very different kind of space? And that's kind of what we're going to look at, because that baseline guidance really falls apart when you start looking at historic buildings, religious buildings, and large buildings that either have mechanical systems that are old, or, as Jason mentioned, non-existent, or weird in some way, which is often the case. So the recommendations then, instead of just looking at the filter you should put in your air handler that may or may not exist, we looked at it for sort of 3 categories: people and what people are doing, the systems themselves, and then workarounds for when the guidelines don't apply. So the people part is probably the most familiar to everybody. I don't know that I've got have much new to say on this, except that when you talk about, we're talking about vaccinations and screening, we're talking about testing requirements, we're talking about sort of agreements to what you will claim to have done or not done when you come into the building. The only thing I'd add is that it needs to be specific to people who are doing different things. So for example, if you have a congregant sitting in a chair with a mask on, there's going to be one set of requirements. If you have a choir member singing at the top of their voice without a mask facing those congregants, there are going to have to be stricter requirements specifically for more regular testing. The requirements for kids are going to have to shift now that they're eligible for the vaccine, but not all of them have had it. So that's just something to keep in mind. And of course, food. You know, masks are probably the biggest table leg holding this thing up. So if you introduce food, the masks go away and it's problematic. Again, all this depends on the risk tolerance of your community. On occupant space, you know, we all know the 3-foot rule, the 6-foot rule. This is really just about sort of the.
What's that?
Sorry, Rick. Okay. Oh, if you have questions, you can interrupt me. That's fine. I'm not going to watch the chat. So, and hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end. So 6 feet is basically the distance it takes for a heavy particulate to drop to the floor. Like the example of choir members and congregants, we want a much bigger distance, 12 to 20 feet is recommended. And then event timing, we'll talk about in a little bit more detail. And then of course, sort of reviewing these protocols as situations change. So on the system recommendations, if you have got a forced air system that's, you know, grills and air coming out of them, even if it's an old one, you may be able to tweak it. So if you've got a modern system, you've got controls, you can just dial up the amount of outdoor air that's supplied or dial it down. That's easy, but you may also be able to move physical dampers to increase the outdoor air supply. And we're going to talk about sort of when that's a good idea to do. It's good to keep in mind that you are going to run up against the capacity of your systems, that systems are designed for a certain level of efficiency so that a recirculated air requires less energy to heat or cool than outdoor air that's either extremely hot or extremely cold. So maintaining reasonable temperatures inside and reasonable relative humidity levels is a consideration. I think you could stretch that envelope to a degree because the importance of dilution of indoor air with outside air is so important. We know that there are sort of relative humidity levels at which virus particles are more comfortable or less comfortable. And so you want to sort of target 50% relative humidity. Frankly, it's a drop in the bucket in terms of the effectiveness of reducing risk compared to introducing outdoor air. And it's going to use more energy for your system to cool more hot outdoor air, to heat more cold outdoor air. So that's, I'm going to come back to that again later. And then on the filtration, you want to use as dense a filter as the system can handle. So it would be great if we could all just go out and get HEPA filters and pop them in our air handlers. But what's going to happen is they are not designed for that density of filter. So it's going to choke your airflow. You're going to have less air moving through the system, and it's going to burn out your fan. So there are manufacturer guidelines for any given piece of equipment that you can look at that'll tell you sort of how dense a fan you can put on. Most new ones can go up to a MERV 13. Old ones are designed for MERV 8, and anything else will kill it. So one sort of workaround that we found is that if you rework the ducts that serve these, a larger cross-sectional area of a denser fan will have the same back pressure as a smaller cross-section. So if this is a MERV 8 over here and this is a MERV 13 over here, they actually have an equivalent back pressure. Now, a lot of what I'm talking about in terms of system adaptations don't cost anything. While this does cost something, it's likely cheaper than a replacement blower on an air handler, or the $250,000 it'll take to replace the entire system. So, which sort of gets us into the workarounds territory. In all the analysis we did, starting looking at schools and the different buildings and conditions we've looked at, it's tough to beat an open window. So opening windows or doors, if you don't have a conventional mechanical system where you can control the mix of outdoor air, it is hugely important. So when we talk about the 5 to 6 air changes per hour guidelines for ASHRAE, that makes perfect sense in a room like this. So in a conference room, you've got a contained volume of air, and you want that air to be recirculated, and you want fresh air supplied to it. But when you talk about very different space types, 5 to 6 air changes per hour in this space is kind of absurd because there's so much volume of air relative to the number of occupants. So you can actually calculate a fractional ACH equivalent. So you don't need 5 to 6 air changes per hour in a space like this. You need something like 0.8 because there's just so much air in the space. So when we did an analysis on a specific space, we found that it doesn't take much, frankly. So in this space, we looked at what we would need to, how much outdoor air, given a certain number of assumptions, we need to supply in order to get that 5 to 6 air changes per hour equivalent. And we found that just one window opened, assuming a 1 mile per hour wind speed outside would get us there. And most of the time it's more windy than that. And you could, there are 20 windows in the space, so you could open all of them 1/20th as much, and it'll get you there. So just be aware that because we're dealing with large volumes of space, it may not take as much as you think to get a huge improvement in ventilation. Now, there are considerations related to that. Obviously, we talked about temperature and relative humidity before. In worship spaces, there are often things that are very sensitive to changes to extreme temperature and relative humidity. For example, organs are really finicky. Their finishes, so very thin wood veneers or metal finishes, can be sensitive to that. And if you have, for example, Toro squirrels in your space, that can be very sensitive to extreme temperature and humidity. So potential workarounds for that are before an event to sort of prime the space. So you preheat it, you get the temperature up, you open the windows, it gradually cools down, and at some point you hit a threshold where if it gets any colder, things are going to start to be damaged and you shut it down. That was sort of the solution we were looking at for that condition. And of course, outdoor noise is an issue depending on where you are and what's around you. That's just a consideration. Now, the goal of the 5 to 6 air changes per hour is to make sure that any particles floating around in the air are cycled through the system and filtered out or diluted with outdoor air. If you can't do that, or if doing that is impractical, time solves it too. You close the room down and you wait 24 hours, and effectively the same thing happens. So if you can schedule 24 hours between events, it means that you have eliminated the risk of exposure between one group being in the space at one time and another being in the space at another. So those are sort of passive workarounds. When we talk about active workarounds, standalone filtration devices like standalone HEPA filters, there's one sitting right here, they work. They are a viable solution. They're just not terribly efficient. So for example, to get the same effective filtration dilution impact we got from this one open window, we would need 16 recirculating HEPA filters in this space, which is going to produce noise. We're going to have power sources that we're going to have to get power to each of those. So it's viable, but relatively inefficient. Another version of that are called DFS, disinfecting filtration systems, that are standalone recirculating filters that are kind of nice because they have an electrostatic plate in them that zaps particles. So at least you're capturing a bunch of dead particles instead of a bunch of live virus particles. And there was one sort of strange one where we had a building that had recirculating units that were kind of close to the perimeter of the building. And we found that if we could temporarily tap a duct to the recirculating intake of those units and just run it to a window, we were effectively introducing tempered outdoor air, which helped with both noise and the temperature drop in the space over time. And the reason I put data over here is that there are other systems and pieces of equipment out there that are some exotic, some simple. And I put this up mostly just to share my skepticism. So to take just a couple of them. So UV disinfection. It is true that UV light kills viruses, but it needs time and it needs intensity. So basically, if the UV light's strong enough to kill a virus, it's also strong enough to give people cancer and cataracts. So you can't just park it in your space. If you put it in your air handling units, it is great for keeping Legionella bacteria off of your cooling coils, for example. But for the air that's whipping past them at a few hundred feet per minute, it is doing virtually nothing. And the bigger issue is you have no way to measure whether it's doing anything at all. You can spend $20,000 and put one of these systems into your HVAC equipment and have no idea whether it's working. And the same kind of goes for bipolar ionization. Like, it does work. You introduce charged particles into the air and it does attract virus particles and it does deactivate them. But nobody can quantify how well it works. It's all about sort of how many charged particles you have and the density within the volume of space anyway. So without any measurable information, we've not recommended this. I've talked institutions out of both on multiple occasions. Again, because it's kind of tough to beat an open window. Yeah, so I hope there was something new in here. I hope this wasn't a total repeat of everything you already knew and have been dealing with the last couple of weeks. But in terms of, so those are kind of the like I say, the workarounds. When we think about the long-term impacts of this and how we adapt over the longer term, I think when you do work to your HVAC system, having the pandemic resiliency in mind is just something that we should all do from now on. And that's generally in keeping with design for good indoor occupant health. A pandemic safe environment is a healthy environment by and large, but it is the kind of things that I've talked about are generally lousy for energy performance, keeping your windows open, introducing more outdoor air. So because energy performance is such a critical thing for buildings, as Meta is about to explain to us, what we really need are systems that are highly controllable, where you can dial up the outdoor air and dial down the outdoor air, so that our systems are as adaptable as the people in them. And that's it. Wasn't watching the clock, so Kate, tell me if we've got a couple minutes. I don't know if there are any questions, but that's all I have.
Yeah, there are time for a couple questions if there are any.
If there are any. Otherwise, I'll figure you've all got it figured out. All right, move on.
Meta.
All right. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yep.
All right, so I'll try to make this fairly quick. I have emailed the slides to Kate, so she will be able to share that with all of you afterwards, okay? So today what we'll be talking about is Local Law 97, which is a city law that was enacted in 2019, and it does affect the houses of faith in a particular way. So Bricks and Mortals will host another meeting in the spring that will be more detailed. So this presentation is merely an introduction. My name is Meta Bronzema. I'm an architect and urban designer and a Pratt Institute professor. I'm a member of the Collective for Community Culture and Environment and a board and leadership member of Bricks and Mortals. So this is the outline of the presentation. We'll be talking about what is Local Law 97, why Local Law 97, what houses of faith are covered by Local Law 97, what are Local Law 97 prescriptive measures, which are, the things that the houses of faith need to do to comply to the law. And because this law primarily applies to larger buildings, I want to also discuss very briefly opportunities for smaller houses of faith. And finally, in my last slide, I'll list a few resources where you can learn more about this topic. So this is really a city law that was enacted in 2019. It is the centerpiece of the New York City Landmark Climate Mobilization Act, also known as the New York City Green New Deal. And what it will do is it will place strict limits on greenhouse gas emissions from all buildings larger than 25,000 square feet. So all of those buildings have to limit the carbon that a building emits into the atmosphere by reducing the use of fossil fuels and non-renewable electricity in heating, cooling, lighting, and more by the year 2024. And this will help New York City reduce 80% of its greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, based on a baseline of 2005. So because we're talking about buildings that are over 25,000 square feet, and I'll have a slide that details exactly what buildings are covered, a little bit later on. But here you have a little bit of a visual representation of how many buildings are affected over the 5 boroughs. And at the bottom of this slide, I actually have a link so you can actually play with this and look at those buildings one by one and look at their data. So again, Local Law 97 is only one of several laws that was enacted as part of the larger package in 2019. And there's also Local Law 92 and 94 for green roofs and solar PV. There's Local Law 95, which is about building labeling. You may have seen the letter grades on buildings that were required in November, letter A, B, C, D, and F, showing how successful the building is in its meeting of energy efficiency. And a new law is Local Law 98 about offering wind energy as a potential energy source. So what are the Local Law 97 goals? Obviously, it's to reduce operational greenhouse gas emissions in mid-size and large-size existing buildings, for example, with heating, cooling, lighting, hot water, etc., and to meet New York City's global and local climate plan commitments. And I will detail what those are in the next slide. A side effect from this, which is I'm sure not unintentional, is to actually expand the energy retrofit market by approximately $20 billion from now until 2030. And this will create approximately 141,000 design, engineering, and construction jobs. And of course, the net result will be that the city will have more valuable buildings and bring energy savings to building owners and tenants. But at the core of it all is really, the climate crisis and the commitments that the city made. So already in 2014, Bill de Blasio committed to reducing the city's greenhouse gas emissions by 80%. And that is what 80x50 means. And that is really joining many other nations around the world in similar commitments. And after that, the mayor has also committed to additional targets. And these are called 40 by 30, which is an interim target of a 40% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030. So we have a lot of goals here that are part of the reasoning why this law is in fact being enacted. The city is not alone. The city is working with a state that has its own climate action laws. And you can see there's a real deliberate timeline going from 2020 to 2050. And the ultimate goal is the citywide carbon neutrality. So let's talk about Local Law 97 and houses of faith. You may have heard about Local Law 97 imposing carbon caps, like limits for carbon emission in larger commercial and residential buildings. It turns out that houses of faith are under Local Law 97, but they have an alternate path of compliance, okay? And this alternate path of compliance is to make it easier on houses of faith to meet the climate goals. Houses of faith are not alone to have this particular special path. Certain affordable housing developments and NYCHA developments are also exempted and have special regulations. So what do houses of faith have to do? There are prescriptive measures, which I will show you in a few slides, that are required of houses of faith to implement by 2024. And these include the installation of insulation, sensors or controls for HVAC or heating and cooling equipment, as well as other energy efficiency measures. So houses of faith that are smaller than 25,000 square feet do not have to comply with Local Law 97. But I know that many houses of faith on this call are actually smaller congregations. the city is still very interested in having smaller buildings work toward climate neutrality, and I will discuss that in a few minutes. So, and the city actually offers technical and financial help to actually buildings of all sizes. So what is a covered building under local law 97? So first, it's a building that exceeds 25,000 gross square feet, or two or more buildings on the same tax lot that together exceed 50,000 gross square feet, or two or more buildings held in the condominium form of ownership that are governed by the same board of managers that together exceed 50,000 gross square feet. And one way of knowing if your building is covered is that if your building is currently subject to the New York City benchmarking law, which is local law 84, where you have to report energy and water use to the city, then you know that your building will need to comply to local law 97. So houses of faith, as far as I know currently, are defined in the law as buildings whose main use or dominant occupancy is classified as occupancy group A-3, religious house of worship. And those houses of faith that are over 25,000 square feet must meet the prescriptive measures by 2024. So let's look at what those prescriptive measures are and what needs to be done in what order. Now, I had a conversation with a technical advisor from the New York City Accelerator, which is really the technical assistance unit for this local law 97, and spoke about, how to really address these potential improvements to the building. So we have like adjusting temperature set points for heat and hot water, repairing heating system leaks, maintaining the heating system, installing temperature controls, insulating pipes, insulating the steam system or water tank. And you're probably wondering, well, what if my building doesn't have steam, right? And I'm going to go to the next slide to show you the rest of them. Well, it turns out that these measures have to be applied where it makes sense. So if your building doesn't have steam, then you need to use other, you need to choose from this menu of possible measures what actually does make sense, okay? So we have indoor and outdoor heating system sensors and boiler controls. We have repair of heat traps. We have upgrading various, HVAC components, upgrading lighting, which is really very, very effective, weatherizing the building, installing timers and exhaust fans, and so forth. So this is the full list. It comes directly from the law. You can have a look at it later in greater detail. But it's very clear from my conversation with the technical advisor that, not all of them are applicable to all houses of faith over 25,000 square feet. This is a menu where the architects and engineers that work with the house of faith really have to sort of come up with something that makes sense, with the goal of course, reducing the carbon emission and energy use of the building. So how do we comply with this? So the houses of faith larger than 25,000 square feet have to send a report to the Department of Buildings on May 1st, 2025, documenting their prescriptive measures, the list that I just showed earlier, during the year 2024. And then they have to send another report every year after that. So one of the pieces of advice that I got was that really any house of faith of that size should really start planning sooner rather than later. so that, if something goes wrong in the year 2024, that doesn't compromise the whole effort. Okay. So it's really all about the best effort and a smart solution for whatever property you have. And in many ways, the Department of Buildings and the city will look at, each property on a case-by-case basis. So what if, a faith-based institution decides not to comply, or just take it very easy and just do one thing off of the list? It was very, very clear to me that this will not be acceptable to the city, and the city will issue a Department of Finance and a Department of Buildings non-compliance letter, and possible fines to the property owner. So I asked about details about the fines. I didn't get much in response. We may find out more later. Of course, there's also the issue of buildings that are landmarked that cannot change their facade or their windows to be more energy efficient. And again, the city is willing to work with any property on a case-by-case basis. And at the bottom line, each building and, together with their technical assistants, have to prove that they're doing a good faith effort in furthering the goal of lowering the carbon emissions of their building. So you can see there's a lot of planning went into it. The law was enacted in 2019, and the emission caps for non-faith houses of faith will become more stringent as time goes on. And it is quite expected that even for houses of faith and affordable housing projects, that the requirements will become more stringent rather than less stringent. And you can sort of see the year that you have to focus on is 2024. You can see the end of 2024 is the prescriptive path deadline. That is when all of the improvements to the facility have to be done. And the report happens, on May 1st of 2025. So what about smaller houses of faith? So the city is really encouraging buildings of every size to retrofit and climate-proof their buildings, just because it makes a better city, and because people can enjoy a more comfortable building and enjoy the savings of a more energy efficient building. So the city is offering a variety of low interest loans through financial partners. For larger projects, the city has created a financial instrument called PACE, but smaller loan packages are also available, and all of those smaller loans are currently being figured out by the city. And this is something that you would have to negotiate on a one-by-one basis with the New York City Accelerator, which is the office that actually gives technical assistance. And I will give that contact information at the end. So there are other agencies that are also offering energy incentives for retrofits and renewable energy installations, including NYSERDA, which is the state agency for that deals with energy and renewable energy and retrofits. An option that was mentioned in my conversations with the city were energy services agreements. And I believe in the Fordham presentation that we heard earlier, one of the sort of energy service providers is Block Power. So what they do is they help install either heat pumps or solar panels for a very low cost and on a long-term basis. And it generally results in lower energy bills and very, very little upfront money for the church. Another option that is interesting to discuss, and I'm sure we'll discuss it during the next meeting, is solar cooperatives or community solar, whereby a large roof or large parking lot of a faith-based organization can in fact, be used to benefit not only the building itself, but the entire neighborhood. So Bricks and Mortals, as I mentioned, will hold another event dedicated to Local Law 97 and similar issues early next year. And we'll dive into much, much deeper detail. But if in the meantime you have questions about all of this, you can contact the New York City Accelerator for free technical assistance. And there's a website listed here. There's an email listed here, as well as a phone number. And yeah, so that is the end of my slide, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mita. Beautiful. Very interesting. Questions, comments?
The one thing I'd love to say is that developers and large property owners are paying very, very close attention to Local Law 97. They're thinking a lot about it, and nobody else is. So this is a PSA to think about it, take it seriously. Just to terrify you all, we did a back of the envelope analysis for a large building owned by a higher education institution in New York City. They are a grade B. They've been doing their energy reporting. In 2024, their Local Law 97 penalties were going to be a few $1,000s, and by 2030, it was going to cost them $100,000 a year for their level of compliance, their greenhouse gas emissions. So in 2024, it's not so bad, but the penalties are a hockey stick shaped, and they get very onerous. So this alternate compliance path of the prescriptive measures is huge. For houses of faith, this is far and away the easiest path to this. So we'll talk about this more in February. Just to get you all terrified about it.
I think we all know too much about religious institutions to know how hard this is going to be for them and how mission consistent it is for them. So I think we need to help them get ready for this. All right. We're a little over time. Kate, what do you want to do?
So yeah, I mean, if there are any quick member announcements, I know people have been chatting a few things, but if there's anything final, speak now.
This is Peter Cook. I just earlier on, I just put urging you to contact us about Kevin Ritter if you're wanting to start a pre-development process and need money to help you with that. Much like what Jason described, we really need candidates right now for that money because we have it available. So please contact us, and part of that consultation means working with Bricks and Mortals on the non-housing side of the house. So I put the website up there as well, ihacny.org.
And we also wanted to shout out your gala tonight, if you want to mention that.
Oh, great. Yes, our gala is tonight. And that is, I'll put that in the chat, but it's up on our Facebook page. But you can go to in our website, New York State Council of Churches, and you can get all the information. But I'll put something up here.
Right. And is there anything else from anybody? Okay.
We're recognizing 2 affordable housing development projects tonight as our honorees as well. So anyway.
Including Bill, who is maybe on this call
including
still.
Bill Shility, which did this amazing thing. So up in the Bronx, great project.
And like we mentioned, probably in February, we'll be having an event on new energy and sustainability laws, local law 97, 95, 94, and 92, what they mean for FBOs and a more sustainable New York City. And that should be a really, really helpful event, as you might have guessed from Meta's preview. Thank you very much, Meta and Taylor and Jason, all the presenters for today. Our next meeting is in February. We'll be doing a survey or touching base that run before then to see if we should do it in person or only by Zoom again. Again, as I mentioned, if we move to in person, it will be hybrid. So you'll have the option of doing either. Another reminder again, please complete the member survey. It's very, very brief.